companies and do a lot of coaching and training. We do some development. So we have a small business. I'm the CTO of a small business in the New York City area. All right. And by the way, we do, my company does offer a bunch of training courses. And one interesting one regarding project management is we actually have a tie-up with the Project Management Institute in New York City. And we provide Jira fundamentals and Jira intermediate training as a tie-up with them. So some interesting stuff there. All right. So what is the problem we're trying to solve here? Well, if you look at the traditional approach to project management, I'm talking about large IT projects. And this approach really started, is espoused by PMI, the Project Management Body of Knowledge. It applies equally to large construction projects as well as IT. So there's certain things that make sense for very large physical projects that we may have to adapt for. And what we're learning now with Agile is we have to adapt these techniques for use in for IT projects. But basically, you'd get your resource-loaded Gantt chart. You'd be doing some risk management, and you'd probably be doing earned value management, right? That's basically your traditional approach to project management. A lot more to it than that, but there's just some of the highlights. And essentially, a lot of it comes down to reviewing a lot of documents. So at least in the government space, I can speak most intelligently about the government space because that's where I've mostly been involved over the last 10 years. And essentially, you'll end up with kind of a big waterfall sort of Gantt chart. And in the beginning, you're reviewing project management plan, risk management plan, ConOps, all that kind of stuff. Then you get to functional specification. We write it, send it to the government, they review it, send it back. Then there's, of course, design specifications, then, test and evaluation master plan, system test plan, and then the system test results. And then finally, we get to government acceptance testing and user acceptance testing. So GATT actually stands for government acceptance testing. So really, when you look at governance and oversight in a traditional approach, a lot of it centers around reviewing artifacts, most of which are documents. So that's kind of where we're coming from. And so the question is, when you've got an Agile project, what makes governance and oversight more difficult, or challenging, or would lead us to a different approach? And of course, we have lack of detailed plans up front. So how do you budget it? How do we earmark a budget for a certain project? A lot of times I know in the commercial space, a lot of times we have a product that we're sort of have a level of investment over time. But in the government, there's a lot of projects where, for example, we need to get off the mainframe, or we need to achieve this capability. So there's a lot of, even though they have products, they still have projects within those products that is certain key milestones that they need to achieve. And those need a budget. So we cannot escape projects. Projects are not going away, in spite of what you might have heard in the Agile press. It's not happening. Less documentation doesn't mean there's no documentation, but there's a reduced emphasis on it. And we don't really have these traditional metrics like earned value or function points, that kind of stuff. We have story points sometimes. What are those? And then we've got, on top of that, to make matters worse, there's not sort of a single like PMI, PMBOK, that's kind of what everyone uses. There's Scrum and Kanban and scaled Agile and large-scale Scrum and all kinds of different approaches. And it's evolving very quickly. So what do? How can we provide effective governance and oversight for Agile projects? This is the problem we're trying to solve. And the asterisk is, how can we do this without having to know all this stuff? A lot of stuff there. So can mere mortals or non-technical people really effectively provide governance and oversight? I maintain the answer is yes. So, and this is based on real-world examples that we have done, we have facilitated in the government space. So here is an approach. So basically, what we did is we said, okay, well, we need to figure out what areas are we looking at? Like, what are the different buckets of things, and sort of, and I modeled this very much after PMBOK. PMBOK, arranged or divided project management up into knowledge areas. And of course, is there some overlap? Of course there is. This is not scientific. This is not perfection. This is just what are the sort of general areas that we need to deal with. And so we came up with these 10. And what I'm going to do today is do a whirlwind selection of just a couple of these, the ones in blue here, just to show you some examples of some of the ways that we helped the governance and oversight people to do their job without requiring technical knowledge, deep technical knowledge. So for example, let's talk about Agile methods and frameworks. What do we care about there? Well, what has the team chosen? And what are the required practices that go with that? And is the team actually observing those practices? Are they doing what they say they're doing? So if it's Scrum, then what are the Scrum practices, and are we actually following those? And so on. So, and that's just, we ask for evidence, right? And so, for example, are retrospectives being held regularly? For Scrum teams, retrospective is an important part of it. And notice, in a lot of Agile tools, the retrospectives are recorded in the tool. So here's an example from version 1, and we can see, actually, you probably can't because it's very small print, but if you could, you would see that 2018 and 2019, there were regular retrospectives, and something happened. In 2020 and 2021, there's almost no retrospectives. So probably the pandemic, other things happened, but those challenges make retrospectives even more important. Like that's when we definitely need our retrospectives, when we're undergoing, challenges and things are changing. That's the most important time to, not when everything's fine. So this is a problem, and this is something we should be looking for. All right, so what about sprint lengths? Scrum says we should have, basically be having regular, consistent sprint lengths. Now, whether they're 2 weeks, which is the norm, or 3, or even 4, or even 1, which is pretty rare, but they should be relatively consistent. And we can see here that in spite of my typo here with occurrences, we can see that the sprint lengths are anything but consistent. There's a lot of discrepancies there. And that just makes metrics so much harder to, there's a lot of things. There's a reason that the Scrum guide says keep your sprint lengths consistent. And this is something that, very quickly we can get from the tool. And without even talking to anyone, we can just look and see what the lengths are. So that's number 1. Let's look at another one. Agile requirements. So what are Agile requirements? Well, that's basically the whole requirements analysis and discovery and all that stuff using Agile techniques. For example, user stories. You don't have to use user stories, but that's a very popular technique. It's probably the most popular. And most teams would use that because there's so much documentation. It's pretty well known. So if you're going to deviate from that, you should have a good reason. But so we mostly assume user stories. So we're basically saying, are they being used? If so, are they well formed? And we should spot check. It's sort of like the spot check for the packages that come off the assembly line. We would look at a few of them and inspect them. Inspected by number 252. That kind of stuff. If there are mandatory elements, some agencies, for example, this particular agency said, we are using story points, period. Okay, if you're using story points, does every user story have a story point estimate? And if not, why not? So let's take a look at this. So user stories is a user story. It is a story that the user tells. So it should be something that's at least theoretically understandable to our users. So let's take a look at one of these that we found. As a developer, I want to activate the clickable buttons on the installment agreement setup screen to properly redirect or link. There's no way this is understandable to a user. Now there's a real requirement hiding in here somewhere, but this is clearly not written from the point of view of the user. So anytime you see that sort of as a developer or something that's not a real user, that's a problem. All right, and hopefully everything's okay. Everyone can hear me? Okay, good. All right, next. Do the user stories indicate business value? Every user story should have a why. Why are we doing this? Why are we spending time doing this? And they should say that right up front. What is the reason? So let's look at this one. This story updates the issue table after adding a new issue from the add issue modal window. Like, what is the point? There's no so that. There's no why. And that's important. We need to know why we're doing this. There should always be a business value or a reason why this is happening. So another example of a user story that's really not written properly. And these are the kinds of things, a little bit of knowledge is needed, but you certainly don't need to know how to program Java to do this kind of analysis. You're just looking to say, is this something that I would understand if I were a user of the system? Or it would at least, theoretically make sense to me. So mandatory elements. So for example, in this particular organization, they required all user stories to be estimated. Okay, fine. If that's, for governance and oversight, we're not necessarily saying that your practices are wrong. What we're saying is, are you practicing what you preach? Are you doing what you said you're going to do, right? So doing kind of coaching, a coaching hat is a different hat. That's saying, are these the right practices at all? Or could we have better practices possibly? That's a different discussion. I'm not having, that's not the purpose of this. This is to say, are we, doing what we said we're going to do? Are we consistent? And you can see that we have 55 pages, I've circled here in red, 55 pages of unpointed stories. So user stories are just sitting there without any story points. So this was, a large percentage of user stories that are just sitting there unpointed. So we're obviously not really consistently following what we say our practices are. So that's not good. And you can see this is pretty easy. You don't need a lot of technical skills to see this. This is pretty straightforward. So let's look at number 3, forecasting, scheduling, and planning. So again, right, if we have just a consistent level of investment and we're always delivering good value and we have a product and it's going on forever, this is much less of an issue. But if we have key milestones that we need to hit, for example, get us off the mainframe, or we need to have an initial operational capability to support rapid DNA so that bad guys don't get away. I mean, like a certain, or maybe we've promised Congress that we're going to have this capability by X date. Like there's certain milestones that are set from time to time, and those need to be managed like a project. And for that, we need to forecast. We need to be able to forecast and reforecast accurately as possible. So to do that, we first have to capture the vision at a high level. The vision needs to be in the tool at a high level. It's not a detailed level. This is not, waterfall where we capture all the requirements up front. But we do need to have coarse-grained requirements. Otherwise, we can never do forecasting. If there's a certain milestone we need to hit, we need to have some way of forecasting whether we're going to hit that or not. And the way to do that is to have coarse-grained elements that we can then estimate. And then we should use statistical methods for that. So, for example, this is the particular tool that was being used by this one agency. It's called version 1. Actually, now it's called, I don't know, digital AI or something, but it used to be called version 1. And you can see that built in, they have this Monte Carlo simulation where you can predict with certain degrees of certainty when a particular milestone is going to be hit. So this capability is right in their tool. Nobody was using it. Nobody was looking at it. And it's in the tool for a reason. It's there to do this job. So are the tools being used properly to achieve what we need to achieve? In order to do and by the way, other tools have this as well. Jira has this with a plugin. Not entirely certain about IBM and Microsoft, but many tools these days have a statistical approach, forecasting approach based on Monte Carlo. And even if they don't, there are plugins. So this is, it's not so exotic anymore. And for that matter, you can do a Monte Carlo in an Excel spreadsheet. It really doesn't take that much, but it's been shown to be a better way to go than straight line forecasting. But in this case, for version 1, what we needed was a swag. So the way version 1 works is you have capabilities, which you have user stories, you have features, which are groups of user stories, and then you have capabilities, and even above those you have epics. So it's sort of a multi-layered decomposition of large-scale requirements into finer and finer grain. And you can see that the swags are not filled in. See, they're all blank. And so to even do this kind of forecasting, we have to have a swag. And basically what the swag is, was basically, it stands, does anyone know what swag stands for? I don't know if we can type in the chat or not. I know it's a bit difficult with this remote situation. All right, no worries. It's not a real-time feedback, but swag is sophisticated wild-ass guess. So it's basically you're making a guess as to how many user stories you're going to end up with, and that's what we can use for the basis of, because remember, we don't create all the user stories up front, so we have to have some way of estimating how many user stories we'll have eventually. And version 1 has provided this field for exactly this reason. We're not using it. So that's something that can be detected. All right. So let's look at number 4, metrics and tracking. So do we have a key set of metrics? Like how are we measuring ourselves? Right? Very basic questions here. Are the metrics consistent with the recommendations of whatever Agile method we're using? And are we actually acting upon these metrics? Like when we get the metrics, when we get the charts, what are we doing about it? Are we doing anything? So a lot of this can actually be detected pretty easily. Take a look at this. Is the output relatively consistent? Like our teams, a high-performing Agile team has a relatively consistent level of effort. It goes up and down, obviously, of course. People go on vacation, all kinds of stuff happens, but it should be relatively consistent. That's sort of the goal. And over time, it should get more consistent. It may be inconsistent in the beginning, forming, storming, norming, and performing, right? The team goes through those different stages, but eventually we should kind of settle down. But if you look here, we're not settling down. This team is all over the place. Sometimes we have a lot of output. Sometimes we have almost nothing. So this is not what we want to see. And this is something, again, it does not take a lot of technical chops to look at this. We can find this chart and say, what's going on here, guys? What's up with this inconsistent output? How are we supposed to do any kind of forecast? Imagine trying to do a forecast, an accurate forecast with a team that has an output like this. It's really, the error bars are going to be immense, and that's a problem. So we can see that. What about burn downs? Burn down chart is a typical chart. Do the burn downs actually burn down? Right? So we start with a lot of work, and we start finishing the work. Your burn downs, it's called a burn down for a reason, because we're so if the burn down looks like this, that's something going on there, right? We should ask the question, what's going on here, guys? What are we constantly adding more scope? Is there scope creep happening here? That we had a certain amount of scope, and as we go, we're adding so much scope that even though we're getting some stuff done, we're going up instead of down. I mean, we don't know. We don't know what the answer is, but we know it's not good. This is not the shape we're supposed to have. So again, these are very simple things that we can do as a governance and oversight body to see what's going on, to peel off the lid and peer in what's going on in there without having to have a lot of technical chops and expertise. What about cycle times? And cycle time is like when you start a piece of work, how long until you finish it, right? Ideally, we want flow, right? Whether we're Scrum, Kanban, whatever, Lean, anything. We want flow. We want to take new items of work and get them done and deliver them, right? That's kind of the point. That's what we try to do in Agile. We'll take a look at this. This user story was active for almost a year. So you do not have to be an expert in Agile to know there's something wrong here. This is not the way it should be. And in this case, it's basically saying that this particular user story, you see 302 days in this column. So a user story came up, it went to active, and it just stayed there. So what does it mean? Does it mean that we're stuck and we can't move forward and we're still working on it a year later? Does it mean that we just abandoned it, we forgot about it, and it's just sitting there? We don't really know. We just know that there's something bad here. Something is not right. So it should never be that way. So we're not looking at these. Clearly, we're not looking at these metrics. Either we're not looking at them, we're not acting on them. Something is wrong. All right, so that's metrics. Almost done here. Let's take a look. We jumped a little bit. We have a lot of material for all of these, but I just wanted to fit a few highlights in for the purpose of this talk. So quality and test automation. So are quality control practices being performed consistently? Pretty basic stuff. Are the major tests, whatever it is that we're using, whether it's functional test or integration test or whatever, are those mostly automated? And are different kinds of tests automated? Maybe performance testing, maybe stress testing. Do we have automation going on in multiple areas? That's what we aspire to, right? So, for example, are peer reviews being conducted? Very standard practice. Well, in Agile land, in many Agile projects, peer reviews are conducted on pull requests, PR, pull requests. So pull request is a piece of code, I finished some work, and I'm submitting it for review. That's a pull request. So let's just take a look and see if there's something we can see without any technical knowledge required. Just very basic. So let's take a look. You see all these pull requests. Look at this number here. You see this number here by the bubble? 17, 12, 7. That indicates there's a robust dialogue. Peer reviews are happening. People are talking. They're discussing. This is what you want to see. This is now we don't know whether the ultimate quality is great or not, but it's very likely that it is because they're talking about it. They're discussing. That's the whole point. That's what we're trying to do. So we can see these peer reviews are happening, and but let's contrast that with another project that we looked at. So this project I was just looking at, the average number of comments was 6.7. So basically, any piece of code was getting analyzed and reviewed and discussed and probably fixed. Let's look at project B. Same number. So I did a spot check. Real quick, of just 152. There were thousands of pull requests. So I just looked at 152, just like 3 screenfuls. Very quick. Took me 5 minutes. And I saw there were 5 comments in total. So the average number of comments is 0. You know what this is? There's a name for that. It's called rubber stamping. Rubber stamping. There's no review happening. So that is not what we want to see. So all right. So that's peer reviews. What about test coverage? So of the automated tests we have going, are we tracking how much of the code, what percentage of the code is being covered? So in this particular situation, the agency had a really nice dashboard. It looks very complicated. To really interpret every aspect here, of course, you have to have a lot of technical knowledge. But guess what? We don't need all of that. All we need to do is look at this big number right here. You see that? 85%, that is good coverage. So any project that has even let's say greater than 50% is in a good place, and 85% is a very good place. So we've seen projects with like 0, 10%. That's where we need to worry. So anywhere with 85% test coverage, at least something good is happening. So that's test coverage. Now let's look at the last one that we have here today, DevOps and ALM. ALM is Application Lifecycle Management. That means your ticketing system, basically. And so is the Application Lifecycle Management tool configured correctly? Are teams using it consistently? Right? Because if your teams aren't using it consistently, how are you going to roll up and have aggregated metrics? And if you can't have aggregated metrics, how is management and leadership supposed to lead? How are they supposed to know what's going on? So this could be a real problem. So let's take a look. So the version 1 product has a built-in hierarchy. Basically, you define product lines, and from there you define products. And from there, you have product increments, aka releases. So you do have to know that sort of basic knowledge, just basic stuff. And so a product would be one software application, something like that, right? Or a suite of related applications. So for example, it might be disability claims, something like that. So if we look here and we see that we can see that under the benefits product line, right? There's a product line called benefits. Okay, so far so good. There are products, PCS, data, Ginsu, Grumpy, claims. Okay, so far so good. And under claims, we have a bunch of releases, a bunch of product increments. But then one of them says it's a value stream. That's going to wreak havoc. Because a value stream is a totally different thing. And so you're basically got dirty data right here. So that's dirty data, and that's going to significantly interfere with the ability of the tool to aggregate. Because you want to say things like, how does this release compare with this release? So that's just dirty data, and it should be relatively easy to fix, right? This is not incredibly difficult to fix. If anyone was kind of paying attention to this, they would have fixed it, a long time ago. Look at this one. Here we have a bunch of releases, but one release is a child of another. Like what's going on there? Each release should be at the same level. We're making release 1, then 2, then 3, then 4. This is not like release 5 beta or something like that. It doesn't work that way. So each of the product increments should be at the same level. So somebody just kind of probably just did a fat finger with the mouse and just put it underneath, and the tool just made it a child, and suddenly all your aggregation, all your reports are going sideways. It's not gonna work. So that kind of thing should be relatively easy to detect if we're looking for it, right? If we're looking at this stuff. Let's look at another one. So the way you do releases is you have your stories, and they get assigned to a product increment. So saying, okay, for release 2, we're going to do this, and this. Very straightforward, right? What are you going to do for a given release? So here, let's take a look at the numbers. You see the number up here? It's very difficult. You can't read it. But basically what it's saying is we have 3,410 items, like user stories, defects, that kind of thing, right? The items. 3,400 of them for this product. But if we add up all of the items that have been scheduled to release, there's only 702. So why would we? There's something wrong here. Why would we have almost 2,700 items not assigned to any release? This we got to ask about this, because remember we don't do waterfall. We're not identifying all the requirements up front. So the backlog should not be that huge. That's way too big to have, like, I don't know, 50 different releases worth of items in your backlog. That's just way too big. It's unwieldy. Nobody could manage that. So the fact that there's only 702 assigned to a given to each of the releases, there's definitely a problem there. That can't be right. So that's the kind of thing we can look for. All right. So I've shown you a bunch of things. Probably the next question in your mind: how am I doing on time? I think I'm doing okay. We're almost done. So the question is, okay, a lot of this stuff looks fairly straightforward, so maybe we can automate it. And the answer is, of course we can. But what's interesting is, so at Ariel Partners, full disclosure, we're actually putting something together to do just that. But what's interesting is we really haven't seen it done. So at agency after agency after agency, we see a list of all of these problems. And they basically give people checklists. And like, did you check this? Did you check this? Did you check this? Did you check this? But there's no automation applied. So to me, this is a problem that's begging for a solution. So what we want to do is apply automation to Agile oversight. And so the first question is, well, what are we working with? And the answer is it's probably one of these 5 tools. Now, I know there's a lot more tools in the market. And so the question is, well, why would I pick these 5? Here's the reason. Generally, for the government, on-prem is good. They still have, and what I mean by on-prem, it's gov cloud. It's a private cloud. It's not really on-premise. It could be on-premise, but on-prem / private cloud. Highly secure government cloud. But it means it's under their control, not the vendor's control. So that's okay. FedRAMP is okay. So if you're in the public cloud, but you have FedRAMP certification, now FedRAMP certification is extremely onerous. I've heard some vendors estimate that it takes them $100,000 worth of investment and up to 2 years to get FedRAMP certification. It is extremely difficult. But it's all cybersecurity stuff and everything. There's a lot there. So that's okay if you emphasize some miracle. And actually, version 1 does have that. Version 1 has FedRAMP certification. But if you're a regular SaaS product, like 99% of the tools out there, they're not going to. Most likely, they're not going to go for that in the government space. So that's why it's probably one of these 5. Because they all have either a FedRAMP or an on-premise solution. So here are some examples. I know it's hard to read, but here's some examples of some of the business rules I'm talking about. I'll just call out a few. So for example, a closed release with active issues. So we basically have a release, or AKA product increment, and it's done, it's finished. But if you look at the items attached, assigned to that release, some of them are still saying active. So what does that mean? The release is dead and gone. It's gone. But there's still active stuff in there. So there's something wrong. That's definitely a data integrity issue. Either we forgot about it or something. So all of these kind of things. There's just a lot of business rules. So the point is, the way we can start to automate this stuff, step 1 is let's codify the business rules. Let's capture them. What do we mean? What are the things that need to be in place? So all the things that I just talked about for the last half hour, how can we express those in terms of a business rule? And some of them are more easy than others. I get it. We're not going to be able to automate everything. But even if we can automate just 25%, that's a huge win, right? So here's what we've done. We've created a Jira plugin called Seatbelt. And Seatbelt automates this oversight for Jira. So you can see it's a little plugin here on the left-hand side. And when you click on that, you get this. And you can see here your rules. A story is not assigned to an epic. So if you're decomposing your requirements, and you have a requirement that doesn't have any parent, it means it's an orphan. Like, where does it belong? We should be linearly decomposing our requirements. So that would be a problem. Issue's not updated in 6 months. So if you have an active issue and nobody's touched it for 6 months, that's probably a problem. So basically, these are the rules. And you can see that one of these rules is being violated. So what I'm doing is I'm looking at a release, at a product. I'm running these rules against all the items in that product just by clicking the button. It runs all the rules and it says, aha, one of these rules is being violated. And if I click on it, I can say, here is the violator. So I have a user story in here that doesn't have a parent. So then I can click on that, I can fix it. And once I do, when the issue is fixed, Seatbelt detects that change, it reruns the rules, and ta-da, everything's fine. So basically, Seatbelt is like a little reminder. It can't fix things for you. It won't fix things for you. But what it'll do is immediately tell you if you violated any one of these things, so you can just fix it right away. And that way they don't build up to you have like hundreds or even thousands of problems. You're constantly fixing stuff. You're keeping everything neat and tidy. So you know, your house, right? If you keep sort of doing a little bit of cleanup every day, it doesn't become a nightmare. And you know, I'm here to testify what happens if you don't do that. So it's a good thing. So Anyway, what does a rule look like? Well, it's pretty straightforward. It's basically SQL. And we have, you know, the helpful hints and examples and all that kind of stuff. But basically it comes down to, so writing a rule is not trivial. But once you have those rules, you write them once, and then you run them a million times. So the idea is you can write these rules, you can put them in there, and it just keeps everything neat and tidy. So, all right, so what's our roadmap? Well, we are creating it now for the SaaS product, which is ironic when I just got done telling you that the government, which is our main customer, doesn't use SaaS. But that's what we've done. And we're releasing it for free. So it's going to be a free plugin. We think that you know this will be valuable for the reasons that I just outlined. And if so, that's wonderful. What we'll do is we will be extending it to other platforms, version 1 and Azure DevOps, very popular. Perhaps IBM, we're not sure yet. Depends on what the demand is. And then what we'll do is we'll make the on-prem versions paid. So the versions that the government would likely use, they're going to want support anyway. So we're going to probably make those the paid products. We'll keep the SaaS versions free. And that's our plan for now. So that's our roadmap, and that's what we've done. And so far, I haven't seen any other kind of automated attempts to do automated governance. If you know of any, please let me know. I would love to hear about it. But basically, the point of all this is that Agile teams require proper governance and oversight. It's to think otherwise is crazy. So whether they say, oh, we're fine, we don't need it, that's not true. It's extremely valuable and it's absolutely necessary. But we can take a collaborative stance. We don't have to be so adversarial. It is different. It's different than traditional governance and oversight. It requires a different approach. There's different knowledge areas that those are the ones that I selected that we put together at Ariel, and different tools and metrics. And we want to be proactive and collaborative, right? So we're finding things, issues way before they become problems. So hopefully with that we can avoid the watermelon project, right? That's looks green, but it's completely red on the inside. So we don't want that. What I hope I showed is that you can do a lot of governance and oversight without technical skills. So many of the elements are relatively simple to review, and of course, you can employ a technical governance and oversight body can employ a technical SME to help fill in the gaps where they need to. And many elements can be automated. The first step is to codify the rules. Once we understand what the rules are, then we can start to automate them. And the ALM tool itself is a rich source of information. It doesn't have everything. And we haven't even thought at Ariel, we haven't even thought about how we could automate the other pieces. We're just starting with the ALM tool, meaning the ticketing tool. But looking at source code and other things, that's a further dream. Hasn't happened yet. So with that, thank you very much, and I'd love to take some questions if we have some time. I see a question emerging. Organizational behavior. Yes. Sort of cultural things and yep. Oh, 100%. It's an issue. So one of the things I didn't touch on is team. I'll just give an example. One of the things I didn't touch on was team, sort of HR, like how teams are staffed, how they're organized. And that gets into some cultural things. For example, at one agency, there were teams that were very much sort of functionally oriented. Like there was a team of developers and a team of front-end people and a team for this and a team for that. It was all sort of component-based. And the architect said, look, this is the way we've done things. We do it this way so that the architects can all be in one team and they can make sure the architecture is really, really great. And that is a challenge. That's a real challenge. It really does require leadership. But the good news is what we can do is say, what Agile methods are we espousing? And usually those Agile methods will have something to say about that. So they'll say, look, we should have cross-functional teams. And then we'll say, okay, as oversight people, as oversight body, we're saying, well, your chosen Agile method says that you should have cross-functional teams, but you don't have cross-functional teams. So you're not following, but it's a little bit, that can be quite challenging. So that was one. Another, I'll tell you a second one. At many agencies, there's a significant, well, probably any organization, there's a limited number of subject matter experts, right? And so when we're doing these projects and working on these products, we all need access to the subject matter experts because they tell us what, they confirm the requirements for us and do all that stuff. Well, in the government, you have all these third party, all these all these different contractors coming in. So they have plenty of resources. It's never about resources, but really it is because there's a limited number of subject matter experts to service all of these different teams. And so what was happening at the particular agency we were working with is they were being whipsawed. They were being assigned to like 5 different teams, and it was slowing everybody down. And that is a significant issue with organizational behavior where there's nothing to do but to talk to leadership and say, hey guys, I know we have budget, I know we have 5 different things we have to do this year. We don't have the subject matter experts to do all 5 at once. We have to pick 2 or 3 to focus on, and then do the other 2 after those. And that's a real challenge. But basically, we can do it by saying, here's what you're going to get if you don't do that. But ultimately, it's up to leadership to decide what they want to live with. It's a tough one, very tough one. So you're rightfully bringing up that is the biggest issue. Yep. Excellent. Thank you.